December 20th, 1944. Luxembourg City. The telephone line crackled with a fury barely contained by General Omar Bradley. On the other end, Dwight Eisenhower delivered an order that would test their friendship to its breaking point. Two American armies were being placed under British Field Marshal Bernard Montgomery's command. "By God, Ike, I cannot be responsible to the American people if you do this," Bradley erupted, his Missouri composure finally shattering. "I resign." Eisenhower's response was cold, precise, and absolute. "Brad, I, not you, am responsible to the American people. Your resignation, therefore, means absolutely nothing." That single, brutal moment, buried in the chaos of Hitler's Ardennes offensive, crystallized 3 years of mounting American frustration with a British hero. Why did a coalition fighting for survival against Nazi tyranny find itself torn apart not by the enemy, but by the personality of one man? The answer lies in an accumulation of clashes, from North African sand to German mud, that turned military genius into a military burden. This is the story of how American commanders came to view their most prominent British ally with emotions ranging from exasperation to something approaching loathing. The mathematics of Allied command were politically complex. By late 1944, American forces in Europe substantially outnumbered British troops. American industrial output dwarfed Britain's war-stretched economy. Yet Field Marshal Bernard Montgomery seemed constitutionally incapable of acknowledging these realities or adjusting his behavior. To American eyes, Montgomery represented everything they had fought a revolution to escape: aristocratic presumption, colonial condescension, and an unshakable belief in British superiority. He was genuinely brilliant, meticulous in preparation, and careful with his soldiers' lives, which rightly endeared him to his troops. His victories, like El Alamein, were real, but none of this mattered to American commanders who felt repeatedly patronized and publicly diminished by a field marshal who viewed them as enthusiastic amateurs. The friction began not with grand strategy, but with something far more personal: respect, or the distinct lack thereof. The first true clash occurred in the sands of North Africa, March 6, 1943. Following the humiliating defeat of American units by Erwin Rommel at Kasserine Pass 20 days earlier, Lieutenant General George S. Patton arrived to assume command of the battered Second Corps. What greeted him was a British command structure that viewed American forces as unreliable auxiliaries. General Sir Harold Alexander, the overall ground forces commander, drafted a report that read like an indictment. American commanders lacked experience, troops lacked discipline, and American units required extensive British oversight. The initial plan for the final Tunisian campaign reflected this bias. Montgomery's veteran 8th Army would deliver the primary blow, while Patton's Second Corps would conduct supporting attacks, essentially serving as Montgomery's shield. Patton understood that this was not just about defeating Rommel, it was about proving American arms could stand as equals. On March 17, 1943, Patton launched his offensive, demanding aggressive action. The Battle of El Guetar provided vindication. American artillery and tank destroyers stopped the veteran German 10th Panzer Division cold in sustained combat, the first such American victory. But the victory carried a bitter aftertaste. Alexander's headquarters, focused on Montgomery's operations, paid minimal attention, and British staff continued to micromanage American operations, repeatedly shifting Second Corps' objectives to ensure they remained auxiliaries to British plans. When the victory parade was held in Tunis, the narrative emphasized British and French achievements, while American contributions received only cursory acknowledgement. The lesson for American commanders was clear: fighting alongside the British meant fighting for recognition as well as victory. The tension became a crisis during Operation Husky, the invasion of Sicily, commencing July 10, 1943. Montgomery had threatened to resign unless his plan, concentrating all landings in the island's southeast corner, was adopted. Ultimately, Eisenhower sided with Montgomery. assigning his Eighth Army the main mission of driving straight to Messina, the gateway to mainland Italy, while Patton's Seventh Army was relegated to protecting the Eighth Army's left flank. For Patton, the message was unmistakable. The Americans would once again play a supporting role while the British pursued glory. Despite Seventh Army comprising a force comparable in size to Eighth Army, the command structure continued to treat American forces as auxiliaries to be employed at British discretion. Patton's frustration boiled over when Alexander, commanding both armies, arrived at Seventh Army headquarters with an entirely British staff. "What fools we are," Patton wrote bitterly, recognizing that the command arrangement guaranteed American marginalization. As the invasion progressed, German forces established strong defenses, quickly bogging down Montgomery's methodical advance south of Catania. Montgomery's response to the stall would define Anglo-American relations for the remainder of the war. On July 12, he signaled Alexander, not requesting approval, but informing him of his intention to appropriate a key road assigned to Seventh Army, and suggesting that American forces halt and defend while Montgomery's Eighth Army executed the offensive. The presumption was staggering. Montgomery was proposing to relegate American forces to static defense and ensure British forces alone gained credit for Sicily's conquest. Alexander, whose admiration for Montgomery outweighed his confidence in American commanders, agreed. Patton, though furious, formally accepted the order to avoid an open revolt that would damage the coalition, but he had no intention of sitting idle. Patton convinced Alexander to let Seventh Army drive northwest towards Palermo, the island's capital and principal port, effectively creating his own primary mission. The campaign became a personal competition. Patton drove Seventh Army with speed that shocked both allies and enemies, capturing Palermo on July 22, just 12 days after landing. Montgomery, meanwhile, continued his methodical, grinding advance. The race to Messina culminated on August 17, 1943, when elements of Patton's 3rd Infantry Division entered the city hours before British forces. Seventh Army had won the race, but the victory was hollow. Montgomery's public reaction combined graciousness with subtle dismissal, implying terrain, not competence, explained the American success. British press coverage echoed this framing, treating Seventh Army's advance as a sideshow against inferior opposition. The scars of Sicily never healed. Montgomery seemed constitutionally incapable of acknowledging that American commanders possessed comparable skills or deserved credit commensurate with their contributions. By September 1, 1944, with German forces reeling in France, the Allied breakout from Normandy had shattered their defenses. Eisenhower assumed personal command of all Allied ground forces, a change Montgomery resented with barely concealed fury. The Field Marshal, who had commanded all ground forces during Normandy, was reduced to commanding only the British and Canadian forces, despite American forces now overwhelmingly outnumbering the British. Montgomery argued that Eisenhower's broad front strategy was unsound, dispersing resources and guaranteeing the war would drag into 1945. His alternative was a single, powerful thrust into northern Germany, seizing the Rhine and driving to Berlin, which he would, naturally, command. This proposal was seen by Bradley and Patton as another attempt to subordinate American armies to British command for an operation that would ensure Montgomery received the glory of final victory. Eisenhower, attempting to compromise, authorized the limited airborne operation, Market Garden. American commanders opposed the plan, arguing its risks outweighed the potential benefits. The operation failed comprehensively by September 25, costing over 17,000 Allied casualties. The war would not end in 1944. American commanders felt vindicated, but their satisfaction was overcome by fury at Montgomery's response to the disaster. Rather than accepting responsibility, Montgomery characterized Market Garden as 90% successful. The claim was breathtakingly dishonest. The operation's main objective, a Rhine bridgehead, had not been secured. Montgomery was declaring victory, rewriting failure as success through sheer force of personality. The conflict reached its ultimate peak during the Battle of the Bulge. When German forces launched their last great offensive on December 16, 1944,
Eisenhower transferred command of two confused American armies to Montgomery. Montgomery's military performance was exemplary, quickly imposing order and coordinating counterattacks. But his conduct after the battle sowed bitterness that would persist for decades. On January 7, 1945, Montgomery held a press conference ostensibly to praise American troops. What emerged was a masterclass in self-promotion disguised as a gracious compliment. He quickly pivoted to describing his own decisive actions upon taking command, presenting them as the key intervention that saved American forces from disaster. He boasted that he had tidied up the battlefield and deemed the battle one of the most interesting and tricky battles he had ever handled. The performance was a calculated insult. Montgomery praised American soldiers while implying they had been saved by his superior British leadership, minimizing the American-led defense at Bastogne and Patton's rapid counterattack. American reaction was explosive. Bradley, feeling profound betrayal, called Eisenhower and delivered an ultimatum. He would resign if Eisenhower intended to keep American forces under Montgomery's permanent command. This was not merely vanity, it was historical theft, an attempt to rewrite American victory as British rescue. Eisenhower, recognizing that Allied unity hung by a thread, privately drafted a message requesting Montgomery's relief unless the Field Marshal apologized. The crisis was only resolved after intense British pressure forced Montgomery to write conciliatory letters to both Eisenhower and Bradley. The damage, however, was done. American commanders now understood that Montgomery would never view them as genuine partners. Every operation, every failure, and every success would be filtered through the lens of protecting his own reputation. This attitude suggested not just vanity, but a fundamental incapacity for honest self-assessment. Winston Churchill, recognizing the danger, made a speech in Parliament on January 18th, clearly stating that the Battle of the Bulge was predominantly an American battle, an American victory, and would be remembered as an ever-famous American triumph. The speech corrected Montgomery's narrative and represented Britain's acceptance that the remaining campaigns would be primarily American endeavors. Montgomery spent the rest of the war increasingly irrelevant to operations dominated by American armies. Years after the war, the conflict resurfaced in memoirs. Montgomery's published recollections criticized Eisenhower's strategy, prompting the former president to break off personal contact. Bradley's and Patton's posthumously published accounts documented the depth of their contempt. The final verdict belonged to Eisenhower, who noted the field marshal's complete inability to understand the political dimensions of coalition command. The American experience with Montgomery provided a lasting lesson. Military alliances require mutual respect, not the subordination of one partner to the presumed superiority of another. The Americans hated Monty not because he was British, but because he made them feel like colonial auxiliaries in a war they were winning. His failure to recognize their worth created a bitterness that no amount of shared victory could overcome.